Hello, hello. Welcome back. So last week we laid out the theory of global elites trying to control the world, especially the economy of the world. We talked about anti-Semitism and ways that Jewish people were portrayed, and where this specifically the beliefs on like why they were drinking the blood of children to get adrenochrome and um, just to find ways to take over, right? We talked about papers that were published, spreading misinformation and really awful accusations about Jewish people, and how that grew over time. Today, we're going to go back. We're going to go back and talk about, how these conspiracy fantasies talk a lot about the Hollywood elites and target many Jewish people who grew their wealth through banking. And we're going to talk about where that comes from. We're going to talk about why Jewish people ended up in those industries and were able to be the main people in those industries. And it wasn't just because they wanted control of those industries. So we're going to get into that. Conspiracy believers think that it's, and it was because they took these industries in order to control the global economy, and obviously to use films, media status to spread their agenda, right? And the beliefs that they control these industries dates back to an anti-Jewish campaign from the 1920s, involving the protocols that we discussed. We talked about those last episode. Shakespeare also created a character who was meant to be a Jewish businessman extracting a pound of flesh from a debtor who defaulted. And this caricature helped the narrative that Jewish financial dealings are full of greed and exploitation. So this obviously goes back a long time, right? So the belief grew about how they control these industries, completely control them, and in the 1900s. But this goes back much farther. As we know, Shakespeare was, died in 1616. So this has been around for quite some time. And we'll get into why I'm saying this, but remember that Shakespeare was a follower of the Church of England, which had its roots in Catholicism, Christianity. So let's talk about why the Jewish people are more likely to be in these spaces of banking and in Hollywood. So there are theories that basically focus in on how Jewish people were excluded from certain professions and denied land ownership. So it led to them being merchants and bankers. And that is a piece of it. But the more likely reason, and more based in, the evidence that we have, is their high literacy rates and the money that they accumulated from that work as merchants and craftsmen, is what led them into these spaces. The other factor is their vast network, because they lived in many locations across the world. They had spread out. And so that helps as well, right? Being a part of or being in different spaces around the world. And we have to go even farther back, right? So to talk about about Jewish literacy, right? So after the ancient temples in Jerusalem were destroyed, and the beginning of the Jewish diaspora, which is an exile or a dispersion of Jews out of their ancient and ancestral homeland, and then their settlement across the globe, And that was just the beginning. So this goes back to the 8th century BCE. So this goes back a long time. This sort of Christian superiority, right? So this obviously goes back a really long time. And this idea that, you know, the temples were destroyed by the Romans, this goes back to Catholicism and taking over Jewish land, exiling the Jews. And as we can see, this has played out again and again. But it's really based in a lot in religion and religious beliefs. So when the Jewish people were exiled and spread around, they relied on religious literacy. And the ones who educated themselves remained Jewish, and others converted to different faiths depending on where they were in the world. And their population did increase when they actually, leaned into that literacy. And so this highly educated population then looked to good paying jobs like banking. And Christians, especially through the Middle Ages, they were viewing charging interest as sinful. So they didn't typically become financiers. Of course, there was a much larger population of Jews at that time, so they did end up dominating that industry due to others not wanting to enter it. They entered it because they were not allowed access to other industries. They were mainly craftsmen and merchants. And then that, as I said before, that literacy made them seek more, right? That's like a lot of us still today, right? Across the world, any of us can say that. As we learn more, we adapt, we want more, right? But Christians have always viewed money as, well, ironically, because there's a lot of wealth in Catholicism and Christianity, but there's a lot of moral issues with money, having money, flaunting money. And so Christians were not wanting to be part of these industries. And Jewish people absolutely did, because they were able to. When you're looking for more than what you're already doing, and there is an industry that is more open and has a easy access to it, then you're going to go to that, right? So thanks to that belief by Christians that money lending was morally wrong, they also put that label on Jewish people, because Jewish people did not have a faith that put that moral judgment on money lending. So in the 1700s, the Rothschild name became popular after Meyer Amschel Rothschild established a German banking business that would grow internationally. Now, at least most of us have heard of the Rothschild name, and I knew the Rothschild name growing up in terms of clothing. So we're going to actually get to that. I always had every year, I had a new Rothschild pea coat that I would wear in the winter. And I don't even know why. Like, it was the thing to do, but it wasn't like we had like money. But it was like the thing that, like, every year I got my new jacket, my new coat. But the Rothschild actually had their origins in banking. So they amassed large wealth and became synonymous with financial power. And that is due to, again, the reasons that I already stated, that Jewish people tended to go to these industries for many reasons, right? But instead, others, mainly Christians, believed that the Jews were taking over the economic fate of the world. And this belief still lives today and has grown, unfortunately. So, as more Jewish people built influential banks in the 18th and 19th century, the conspiracy theories just grew. And with mass Jewish immigration to the US in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they began to hold high positions in the US. You know, they were very literate in these industries. And so banks, financial institutions in New York hired them to higher positions. And the Jewish immigrants also established many financial centers that are still around today, and also took positions in places like the Federal Reserve. So that's where it starts to connect to the government, right? So the theory that not only were they trying to take over the banking of the world, but now they've entered into the governments of the world, and they're trying to really take over in every area, right? Which is ridiculous. They just happened to have experience in those positions. And when they came here, they were able to get positions in those industries and then create their own businesses based on that knowledge and position. So today there are Jewish people who are among the richest in the world, right? And this is due to the generations of literacy and financial and business sense. They worked hard for what they built. And, banking was a way to amass wealth. And that's what they did. And that's how they started at the ground. We talk about on the podcast, I talk about MLMs, right? If you get in early to a pyramid scheme, you're gonna do really well. When you get in at the bottom floor of any industry, any business, a startup, you're gonna end up being the person who makes the most. The people who start the businesses are the ones that make the most, right? The ones that get in and start an industry and grow it are the ones who are going to make the most. So it has nothing to do with their desire to take over the world. If anything, they have been pushed down so many times and made to feel that they are inferior, that how could they feel they could take over the world? It's very interesting when you start to peel back the layers and think about it. So here in the US, many parts of Europe and the Arab world, there is still a lot of malicious rhetoric around the Jewish power. Much of it coming from known white supremacists like David Duke, who was the former KKK Grand Wizard, David Icke, who we're going to talk about next week. He is instrumental in the New Age version of this conspiracy fantasy, and also Holocaust deniers and an alarming number of the general public population. And that's across the world. But we can see a thread here. White supremacists and Christians, especially Christian conservatives, are the main ones who believe this. So this is really rooted in anti-Semitism, in racism, in this deeply rooted idea that money is sinful. And I'm not going to say I'll be the first person to tell you that I think the wealth that people have across the world is insane. But if you look at somebody like George Soros, he donates a large amount of his wealth to different organizations. And he has been, I think that in my research in this, Jewish people are more likely to actually use their wealth for good. And I'm not saying every single one of them does, but they are more likely to do that. They are less likely to hoard their wealth, even though they are some of the richest people in the world, they want to do something with it. And I think that really has to do with what they've been through as a culture, as a people, as a religion, as a race. And, that, so it's really unfortunate that they live constantly with these theories being spread about them and how it makes Jewish people in general, not only with what they've been through, but also with these theories still constantly floating around and in their face, why it makes people stay quiet and be afraid to speak out. But not all is negative. The Chinese actually look to the Jewish business success as something to look up to and try to mimic. We know the Chinese are really driven by success and an industry, right? And rather than accuse them of ridiculous things steeped in anti-Semitism, they actually see people who work their asses off to gain success, and they want to mimic that. They want to do that as well, right? And then one more thing I want to talk about is the stereotype, and I heard it growing up. I come from a neighborhood, that was very Catholic. And so I remember hearing growing up, all like these jokes about Jewish people and money, right? And all of this comes from everything I just shared. These tropes about how stingy they are with their money, and and a lot of this comes from there's this belief that Jewish people are greedy, right? And they're greedy with money. And as we know, this dates back really far, right? We had that caricature by Shakespeare back in the 1600s. And yes, like I said, Jewish people are some of the richest in the world. However, as of 2016, a research report showed that American Jews as a whole did represent the highest earning group in the United States, but more than half of American Jewish households earned less than $99,000 per year, and 31% earned less than $49,000. So to take that stereotype and use these beliefs deeply rooted in anti-Semitism, and then to make jokes about Jewish people and their relationship to money doesn't even make sense, right? Because, like I said, a lot of them actually do good in the world with the money they have. They know what it's like to be left behind. They know what it's like to be oppressed. And the majority, just like the majority of most other religions, cultures, races, are making, low amounts of money. And this belief that, Jewish people are rich, like that all Jewish people are rich, right? Is dangerous. For example, in 2006, a 23-year-old Jewish Frenchman was kidnapped, tortured, and killed by a gang in Paris that was hoping to get a ransom of $500,000. They assumed, simply because he was Jewish, that he'd be rich. But he came from a working class family. He worked as a cell phone salesman. And so these stereotypes can be extremely dangerous, not only in just spreading these ideas about Jewish people, because that's always dangerous. That always will make people look down upon a particular group, right? But it's also dangerous in that there have been physical things that have happened. There have been things that have happened that have physically harmed, as we know, many Jewish people, most Jewish people, most Jewish families. But still today, they are being impacted in a physical, harmful way. And like I said, I grew up hearing jokes or things said and never really knew what that meant, having this sort of preconceived notion, but always sort of questioning it. But it wasn't until I really got to know people who were Jewish as I got older, as I was an adult, that I realized how harmful all of these stereotypes and these conspiracy fantasies are and how it impacts them. And they've already been through so much. So to continue to spread this hate for people who have simply just wanted to exist, to be seen, to be a part of the world, who just simply want to live here on this planet like the rest of us. And they have been continually put down, oppressed, and hated for really as far back as we can go. And to know that most of them, a third of the entire Jewish population, was killed in the Holocaust. And that's probably not even a fully accurate number, honestly. And yet we still spread harmful rhetoric about these people who are impacted and will be impacted for many generations to come, who have been impacted by many generations. Their whole going back, like I said, forever, but especially in the last 100 years. And it can all be traced back to Christianity and white supremacy. So now let's talk about the Hollywood industry. In the late 19th and early 20th century, vaudeville and the garment trade were very popular and especially welcoming to Jewish people. These types of entertainment were looked down on by white Christians in the upper class while it catered to immigrants. They also, because of their experience as craftsmen, these were natural industries for them to enter. They had the skills as tailors and they had the skills to build, and they were it was just easy to enter both the garment industry and eventually the movie industry. So when movies began, the same skills that were needed in vaudeville and the garment trade were needed in the movie industry, right? And it was a natural path for Jewish Americans to move from selling clothing to starting movie businesses and using what they had, and not necessarily that they all moved over, but they still continued in both industries. And those industries are really tightly related, right? They need costumes and clothing for movies. So in these early times of the movies boomed, right? They were this new thing. They were extremely popular. And, non-Jewish Americans still had no interest in being in this business, even with the popularity of them. The audiences were mainly immigrants and other working class individuals. And a lot of Catholic and Christian-based faiths still looked down on the industry and felt they were immoral and corrupt. So again, they entered this industry because there was easy access to it. They had experience and skills that were a natural connection to the movie industry. And Christians looked down on it, right? So again, we have this deeply religious reason why these industries are seen as immoral or corrupt. And then because those who had access to them, those who had the skills to create them, to be part of them, those beliefs, those stereotypes of corruption, of greed, of immorality are put on those people as well. So Jewish Americans really wanted to immerse themselves in being American. They, wanted to just be part of it, wanted to, be included and just be here, right? So studios tended to bring stories of inclusivity to screens rather than cultural and religious differences. They had been subjected to that for so long. That's not what they wanted to portray. However, in their desire to fully immerse and almost disappear, so shedding the past pre-America, which makes full sense, they ended up creating the white cultural identity because race and other identities were much harder for them to find success with. So this is unfortunate, obviously, for many reasons. And once movies started to become more expensive to create, many owners sold to large corporations, not wanting to take the enormous risks that were involved. So they don't even own a lot of the studios that they actually started. So they did, without realizing what they were going to create as that white cultural identity, was based on everything they had been through and wanting to very much assimilate into the typical American culture of that time, or what was seen as the typical American culture of that time. And now I'm going to actually read this. I will happy to post links to things that I pulled information from. So, the Jewish American founders definitely left their mark with the culture they created. Very popular movies that emphasize what's shared in American and Jewish values, and blurring that hyphen between Jewish American until generations to come could consider these identities one and the same. They told stories about love for family, community, and country, stories about earning an honest living through hard work and conducting one's business fairly, stories about protecting the less powerful and standing up to bullies, stories about braving the wilderness and braving a new country to find a place to call home, stories about faith, hope, healing, truth, justice, and the American way. Does this sound like people who want to do evil, who want to control people? The more and more I've learned on all of this and seeing how vast these conspiracy fantasies are, especially in spiritual places. And of course, it makes sense because we're going to talk about at another time how Christianity and New Age are really almost one and the same in a lot of ways. But a lot of people in those spaces claim to not be buying into Christianity, right? To, talking about connection and love for everyone, and yet promoting beliefs that are the complete opposite of that. So that's it for today. It's a lot of information, a lot to sit with. The more and more I have learned, the more and more angry I am at what we as a people, we as a world have done to this group of people who just want to be. I when I think of this, I think that indigenous people and Jewish people have sort of the most in common in the way that they had their land taken away, their place taken away from them, and they were made to spread out to go to places where they were subjected to hate and oppression. And obviously Black people, there's a whole level of oppression there, and they were actually taken from their land, right? Their land wasn't necessarily, well, not all of their land was stolen from them, but they were taken away from their land. They were stolen away from their land. And so there's a slight difference there, but not a whole lot. And to see how Jewish people have been treated for as long as we have written history is really alarming and sad. And I only wish I knew that when I was younger. I think it's really important for us to learn this type of history. There's a lot of things we didn't learn growing up, especially here in the United States, about these different communities of oppressed people and their history and our relation to them. I've dug into to more Japanese history over the years because I found out that my grandmother, who I've never met, we have spoken on the phone twice, that she was from Japan. She's fully Japanese. And even, going into that has been eye-opening, right? As somebody who grew up in an Irish Catholic family who thought she was knew I wasn't just Irish because I was definitely darker skinned and had a different look than the other people in my family. But, diving into that has been very eye-opening. And I think that my hope is that we continue to put this information out into the world to educate. There's obviously a lot of fight back. on educating children about what people have been through and what really Christianity and whiteness have done to other people. So I'll leave you with that. I would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, anything. We'll be back next week. We're going to talk about David Icke. We're going to talk about reptilians and how they relate to all of this. Until next time.